Welcome to another video. Purple Political Talk here. And today we're going to look at my updated map of the 2020 senatorial elections. So, at this point in time, many things are changing and quickly when it comes to the Senate elections. Whether it be primaries being decided where some candidates are getting chosen finally and solidly to pick to go against some of these candidates nationwide, whether it is some events that are happening both at the local and nationwide levels that are moving the balance of power, as well as general unpopularity and popularity for one party or the other. We're going to look at all these different factors when we predict this map and look at who is winning some of these races and by what margin. So before we begin, I wanted to tell you guys to please like and subscribe and turn on post notifications to be up to date with our latest content. So let's get started. So this time we're going to look at our safe states for the Democrats. And while this sounds very self-explanatory, the Democrats actually have safe states. And a lot of you might be thinking in your head, what does that mean? It means exactly what it sounds like. So at this point, the Democrats have solid hold on a lot of these states. Unlike the Republican Party, where they're sitting on slippery slopes in some of these races, where in a presidential year, or actually a presidential race, or a House race, like statewide, they usually win. And now they're focusing and they're going to have to spend their time and money to win these races. And another thing that the Republicans have a very big disadvantage when it comes to this election is simply look at some states they're not contesting. They're not contesting in New Mexico. They're not contesting in Virginia. Those are two states that easily they could be contesting. However, they haven't decided to do so. They're only running a local politician in New Mexico, comparing how they're running a pretty well-known representative, Ben Ray Lujan, part of a political family there. And in Virginia, they're running a police chief. Nothing that exciting when it comes to the Republican Party. And right now, I just wanted to give a little bit of spotlight to the new Massachusetts Senate race. Not only it's more interesting because this primary is about the primary. Currently, there's an Ed Markey versus Joe Kennedy III. There is kind of a duel there when it comes to this race in the primary. So Joe Kennedy is trying to unseat Ed Markey. Who's going to win the primary? Right now, I'm leaning towards Joe Kennedy because of his name recognition. However, Ed Markey might be able to hold on. That is all that I have to say about the safe states for the Democrats, because everything else is pretty self-explanatory. However, let's go now to our Republican safe states. This is what I'm talking about. Some of these states that should be in the safe column for the Republican Party are no longer there. They should be winning in places like Kansas, in Kentucky, in Mississippi, by large margins. However, those margins are decreasing in part by unpopularity for the Republican Party, as well as stellar Democratic candidates. I would say that most candidates that the Democrats are running in a lot of places are very strong candidates, while a lot of the Republican candidates are strong or they're mediocre, most of them. So at this point, it's coming down to candidate choice. They were able to get better candidates, which should mean they should be able to get more seats. So now that we've filled in our safe states and we're seeing some of the trends that we're seeing, let's start by filling in our Republican likely states. So at this point in time, the Republican Party, although they might be losing support when it comes to the safe margins and winning a lot of races by a safer margin, at this point they have somewhat solidified when it comes, they have these races in the likely margin. So some states have their races in the likely margin right now that are Republican states: Alaska, Kansas, Mississippi, Alabama, and South Carolina, and Kentucky. So major things are happening here. One, there's three things that are currently happening. It's three scenarios. One, minority turnout in the South. Two, a primary defeat, a very interesting primary in the state of Kansas. And in the state of Alaska, it's a very interesting Democratic candidate. So I'm going to go through and explain all of them. So out of the state of Alaska, what ended up happening is that they really like independents and third-party candidates. More than a lot of other states. So what the Democrats decided to do is to run a independent candidate, so they would get a lot of the independent vote, which is somewhat of a big part of the electorate in the state of Alaska, and combine it with Democratic vote. Like this, we've seen many independents recently been elected to state office in the state of Alaska. So in this case, we have Dan Sullivan, current Republican incumbent. He's going against Democrat/independent Al Gross. So, I mean, at this point, Dan Sullivan should have a solid hold of the state. It's still going to have a very strong Republican support, as well as the support of a minor third party in Alaska that's far right. So, I mean, he should be able to win here pretty comfortably by around maybe anywhere from the 5 to 10 point range. So, for me, a likely margin is 5 to 15 points. So, I feel like this race is going to come a little bit closer. Now, going on to the Kansas Senate race. This race was looking pretty good for the Democratic Party until we had the primaries. So, I think last Tuesday, there was a Republican primary for the United States Senate in the state of Kansas. So here there was a lot of candidates. It was a crowded field because it was an open seat. This was Pat Roberts' old seat. And essentially what ended up happening, it was essentially a three-way race, when realistically a lot of people expected a two-way race. So originally, Chris Kobach, former Secretary of State in the state of Kansas, was leading in polls, and a lot of people thought he would get first place. The other two candidates, Bob Hamilton and the nominee Roger Marshall, those two were expected to get second and third place respectively. Roger Marshall ended up winning because Chris Kobach and Bob Hamilton ended up splitting votes. So if Chris Kobach was to be the nominee, Barbara Bollier would have been pretty much guaranteed almost a win because Chris Kobach was somewhat unpopular in the state of Kansas. However, now that Roger Marshall won the nomination, at this point it's not looking too good for the Democrats and Barbara Bollier. This race was competitive 2 weeks ago, maybe last week. However, not anymore. I mean, it's going to still be a lot closer because there is still a lot of voters that ended up flipping for Barbara Bollier from the Republican Party because she still does have a lot of Republican appeal because she used to be a Republican and she's somewhat conservative on the Democratic spectrum because, I mean, Democrats are somewhat liberal. So, I mean, at this point in the state of Kansas, I mean, it's not going to be super contested, but I think Barbara Bollier would be able to put the margin under 15%. And the last 4 states are these couple of states in the South. We have two different things, or a couple different things that are affecting these races. First of all, in the state of Mississippi, we have a rematch of the Senate elections in 2018. So incumbent Cindy Hyde-Smith is running for a full term in Congress right now. So in 2018, the race was between Cindy Hyde-Smith and Mike Epsy. So Mike Epsy is a Democratic politician in the state of Mississippi. He is black, so he has a lot of the support amongst the big part of black voters in Mississippi who usually tend to be in like this area of Mississippi. So in 2018, the state of Mississippi, Cindy Hyde-Smith only carried it by 10 points because of extended African American turnout. Since this election is going to be somewhat high turnout, a lot of people believe, I think that margin will be similar. So I think Cindy Hyde-Smith will still win. However, the margin might be somewhat questionable. I would say somewhere around maybe 8 to 12%, somewhere ballpark of that amount. Now, going on to the state of Alabama, this race is interesting. So we have a Democratic incumbent here. So Doug Jones won this election, this special election, to replace Jeff Sessions in 2018, if I'm correct, or 2017. So what ended up happening here was very interesting because we had a candidate that the candidate that Doug Jones beat was a flawed candidate. He had sexual misconduct allegations, so that's why he lost his race. So, I mean, he's very popular for a Democrat in Alabama, and I think he actually has a positive approval rating if I'm correct. So, is he going to win re-election? It's not looking too good for him. And his opponent is Tommy Tuberville. He's a former coach at one of Alabama's premier universities. So, I mean, he's popular around the state. Right now, Tommy Tuberville is constantly leading by around 5 to 10 points in the poll, so I'm not going to question that. I think Tommy Tuberville easily could win from 5 to maybe 12 points max. Going to the state of South Carolina and Kentucky, I found these races to be pretty similar. So, the candidates on the GOP side are two essentially leadership members of the Senate in the GOP caucus, in Mitch McConnell and Lindsey Graham. These are very establishment Republicans. Some of them, at least Lindsey Graham has been in the Senate since 2004, if I'm correct, and Mitch McConnell has been there since 1986. So he's been there for a very long time. So what's going to happen here? So in the state of Kentucky, we have Amy McGrath, a pretty conservative Democrat that's fighting to go against Mitch McConnell. Again, she's a strong candidate. However, Mitch McConnell still does have his support in the state of Kentucky, and it's looking like he will win by at least 5%. However, this is not good for the Republican Party, as they're going to have to spend a lot of money in this race because they can't afford losing the majority leader. That would be a very bad look. And as for South Carolina, we have Jamie Harrison. So he is a notable black politician in the state of South Carolina, and I think that he will be able to push down the margin and make it a lot closer than it has been in the past. So right now, I mean, Lindsey Graham's leading there as well. I mean, he's establishment. He has a Republican base. However, I mean, the race is going to be a lot closer than expected. So we covered all the Republican likely races, and now let's cover the Democratic likely races. So at this point in time, there are a lot of Democratic likely races, and those include states like Arizona, Colorado, Minnesota at this time, Michigan, New Hampshire, and this shows very good signs for the Democrats. Right now they're ahead just by looking at the likely states, 45 to 48 in favor of the Democrats. And these races all have a couple different things of why they're going blue, and I will explain them right now. So in Arizona, we have a very interesting Senate race between appointed incumbent Martha McSally and former astronaut and husband of Gabby Giffords, a popular congressman or former congressman that was wounded by a gun in the state of Arizona, Mark Kelly. So what's going on in this race? So essentially what's going on here is Martha McSally is very unpopular. She was kind of appointed to her seat, so she wasn't elected. When she ran for this Senate seat, or actually the other Senate seat in the state of Arizona, she lost to Kirsten. And at this point in time, that means the voters rejected her once. If they rejected her once when the state was a lot more moderated, I think they could reject her again by a bigger margin. And I would come up with the argument that Mark Kelly is more popular than Kirsten Sinema, so that might mean a bigger margin for him. And we're seeing stuff like this in the polls. He's constantly leading in the polls by 4, 5, 6, 7, 8%. So I think honestly that he could win there by around 5 to 8% ballpark. And I think it's going to be a very good race for the Democrats, as Martha McSally looks like she's not in the strongest place as a candidate. So that's the state of Arizona. Going off to its corner neighbor in the state of Colorado. Here we have a very interesting race just because of the dynamic. So we have a unpopular senator, incumbent, a Republican, Cory Gardner, going against former, somewhat popular governor, John Hickenlooper. So essentially what's going to do it for the Republicans here, it essentially is that Cory Gardner votes for the president a lot more times than he should. So thinking about it, the state of Colorado is a very Democratic state. It has been constantly leaning blue, with the suburbs flipping and inner city vote going up for the Democrats. So Cory Gardner votes a lot more with the Republican Party. He votes around 60% of the time with the Republican Party, which might seem somewhat lower. It might be a little more. I haven't checked completely. That was as of like a couple of days ago. That should be pretty accurate still, but that's not a good look for him, considering most of the state is Democratic at this point in time. Obama won it in 2008 and 2012. Hillary Clinton won it in 2016. And they elected a Democratic governor in 2018. So right now, I mean, John Hickenlooper is in a good situation in this race, just because, one, he is somewhat popular, and he's just somewhat ahead with fundraising, with all these different things. So at this point, since he is a popular former governor, I think John Hickenlooper should have no trouble taking this race, and I think he could take it by at least 5 points, which is a good margin for a race like this. Going on to the Midwest states, we have the states of Minnesota and Michigan. So out of the state of Minnesota, we have current incumbent Tina Smith, who was part of a special election in 2018. This was Al Franken's old seat. And what's going on right now? Tina Smith, she is running for re-election for her full term. She is very popular in the state of Minnesota. Probably not Amy Klobuchar popular. However, she's still pretty popular. And she's going against either Lewis, I think was one of the last names, and I forgot who the other person was. But I mean, this race is pretty solidified for the Democrats. They should be winning here around 10 points. That's what the polls are constantly showing. And this race looks like it's going to be won by her. It's a state that has been trending somewhat blue. I mean, it has had kind of a not so much of a big trend one way or the other, just because House was a pretty much some gains for the Republican Party. However, some statewide offices were very good for the Democrats. So this state is still kind of in the middle when it comes to like trends. However, I mean, Tina Smith is doing pretty good here, and I think she probably will not lose. When it comes to the state of Michigan, this is one of the most interesting races, considering it's in the U.S. bill, but not only we have a Republican candidate who is somewhat aspiring. So we have John James. So he is a black politician in the state of Michigan. He is popular amongst GOP voters. And then you have incumbent Gary Peters. So what's going on here? So John James, he ran for Senate in 2018. He beat, or actually he did not beat, I don't know why I said that. He got close to beating Debbie Stabenow, incumbent Michigan senator. And now he's decided to go against Gary Peters to see if he can win this race. Gary Peters is constantly leading over him in a lot of polls. The JSK forecast shows Gary Peters leading. Fundraising numbers have Gary Peters ahead. And it just looks very good for the Democratic Party. John James, I think, would do great as a candidate nationwide because he's inspiring, he's a minority, and he's a Republican. However, I mean, in the state of Michigan, the Democrats are gaining a lot of support just because a lot of the Michigan voters are somewhat fed up with the Trump administration, which kind of just shows some of the sentiments that a lot of voters have in a lot of these states. So that race should be going to Gary Peters by around, ballpark, I would say, 5 to 7%. I don't think more than that. And out of the state of New Hampshire, we have Jean Shaheen, and this shouldn't be too hard for her for a win. She's very popular, and all the times that she's won re-election in the last couple of times, hasn't been by a huge margin, but also hasn't been by a smaller margin. However, we're in a somewhat Democratic wave here, so I mean, it should be pretty easy for her to win. And I think she's just very popular. She served as governor in New Hampshire, and now she's going on to win another term in the U.S. Senate, I think. She might win by around 8 points, and that's around where a lot of the polls have her right now. So, generally speaking, it looks pretty good for her. So those are all our likely states for both the Democrats and the Republicans. Let's go on to our lean states for the Democratic Party. At this time, there are 2 lean states, I would say, for the Democratic Party, those being North Carolina and Maine. So these 2 races are somewhat quite similar, as I think the challengers are going to unseat current Republican incumbents. In the state of Maine, we have Sarah Gideon, incumbent Speaker of the Maine House of Representatives. She's going against incumbent U.S. Senator Suzanne Collins. So here is a bit of context. Susan Collins was the most popular senator, according to her constituents, in 2018. However, since a lot of the very big controversial votes, and she's started, and all those different things, she's starting to blow a lot more with the Republicans, which is not good considering the state of Maine is somewhat leaning blue. Another thing is that the state of Maine really likes bipartisanship. She has not been showing that. So, at this point, I think a lot of voters do not want Susan Collins back, and she's just super unpopular. Now she's the 97th, or I think she's the most unpopular, like 97th. I will have to check that data. And if I made I think it's 97th, but if I made a mistake, I will go on and fix it down in the comments. So anyways, she is now one of the most unpopular senators in the nation. Not a good look. So Sarah Gideon is leading in some polls. She has some fundraising that's going for her. So winning here is not completely out of picture for her, and she might be able to do it by around a 2 to 3 point margin, which might be good for them. And when it comes to the state of North Carolina, here we have an interesting race as well, because we have a current incumbent state representative, Cal Cunningham, going against Republican incumbent Senator Thom Tillis. So a lot of people think that this race is going to be a lot closer. I personally do not think so, just because Cal Cunningham is raising absurd amounts of money. And that's really good, especially in this swing state. And considering that this seat has a ongoing tradition of never staying and re-electing incumbents, I think that just shows, and it's kind of a bellwether seat to see how things are going. And honestly, Cal Cunningham just has a somewhat large lead over Thom Tillis. He's leaning in polls by 2 to 3%. I think that's where it's going to fall. So I think, honestly, a lean margin looks appropriate for this race. So those are all our lean states for the Democrats. Let's go on to our Republican lean states. At this point, there are some states that are leaning for the Republicans. And at this point, Texas, I think both races in the state of Georgia. And essentially, that's pretty much it for these races. So what's going on in a lot of these races is somewhat not traditional when it comes to these elections. So in the state of Texas, we have MJ Hager, who is a Democratic challenger to incumbent Senator John Cornyn, who, I mean, he's not that popular. I mean, he's more unpopular than Ted Cruz. Just take that as a benchmark. However, when a lot of people compare this race to 2018 Senate race, MJ Hager does not have the same enthusiasm Beto or Rourke had. So it's going to go by 1.8%? No. I think this race might go to by at least 4 to 5% to John Cornyn. It's going to get a lot closer considering that the Latino belt in the state of Texas, as well as the big areas like Houston, Dallas, Austin, San Antonio, those areas and their suburbs are starting to vote more reliably with the Democrats. So, is it going to gain a lot of big margins for the Democrats? Yes. However, are they going to win? Probably not. So, that was the state of Texas. Let's move on to the state of Georgia. So, there is 2 Senate races in the state of Georgia. So, the first one is the seat that's up this year, and that is David Perdue's seat. So, there is this high-profile House race a couple years back, where Jon Ossoff challenged Karen Handel. She served as a special U.S. representative, at least until that term expired. And this race is Jon Ossoff against David Perdue. So, David Perdue is leading just when it comes to money, all these different things, and I think he should be able to win. He's establishment Republican, which in Georgia, that's what they like. They don't like too much of the outsider Republicans, as people like Bush's do very good here, and McCain's do very good here, just because they're so establishment. So, I mean, at this point in time, it's looking pretty good, I guess, for David Perdue. I mean, he shouldn't be too worried. Although Jon Ossoff is raising a lot of money, and African-American turnout might be high, so I think this race could go by around 3 to 5% to David Perdue. And when it comes to the special election, this one's a little bit harder to predict because, for those of you that don't know, this race is a jungle primary. So a jungle primary is a race where all candidates that want to run on one single ballot, and whoever gets 50% first wins. If no one reaches 50% in the primaries, essentially they go on to a runoff. So right now it's going to be hard to tell who is going to win, but I mean the Republican Party, it looks like they're ahead. So right now, when it comes to Republicans, it looks like it's either going to be Doug Collins, incumbent U.S. representative from the state of Georgia, and incumbent U.S. senator that was appointed by Georgia Governor Brian Kemp, Kelly Loeffler. So it's going to be either one of those two on the Republican side. I think that's going to win the election. Right now, I think that Loeffler actually started leading in the polls again, so that might be good for her. But for a long time, Doug Collins was leading in the state of Georgia for that race. The Democrats didn't run too good of candidates here. If they would have ran Jon Ossoff in this race, they would have had a higher chance at that seat. However, I mean, I just think they just chose the wrong candidate in that race. So those are our both our Democrat and Republican lead states. Let's go on to the tilt states, and essentially what decides if it's going to be a half and half Senate or if it's going to be a majority for one party or the other. So we have Montana and Iowa. So a lot of people may be asking themselves, why is Montana not filled in? Why is Iowa not filled in? And it's because these races are more contested than you think. And as of right now, I mean, one race I think is going to go to the Democrats. The other I think is going to the Republicans. So in the state of Montana, we have Steve Bullock, former governor, or he's actually incumbent governor. His term expires this election, and he's going against incumbent Steve Daines. So I would like to compare this race to a 2018 Senate race in Florida, but it's just reverse the parties. So I think honestly that Steve Bullock, just he was popular governor, he's going to have a lot more momentum than Steve Daines. Not many people in Montana know Steve Daines. And I have some subscribers that live in Montana and say that a lot of people are voting Trump Bullock. So Trump and a Democrat for governor. So at this point, it's looking pretty good for Steve Bullock. He's outraising a lot of Steve Daines, and he's leading in some polls. I mean, it's going to be very, very tight. However, I think Steve Bullock might be able to push it out. However, Steve Daines has a very good marketing campaign. I don't know wherever you live, but I don't live in Montana, and I get so many ads from Steve Daines on his campaign trying to fundraise money. So, I mean, that's going to be very interesting to watch. This race changes to the day, so we're going to see what ends up happening here. Well, in the state of Iowa, we have a Senate race where it's very, very hard to tell. So we have incumbent Senator Joni Ernst. She was a high-profile Republican, I would say a couple years ago. She was being considered for Trump's vice presidential pick. And she essentially is more of the rural Republican, and she appeals to the rural Republicans, which, if you don't know, there's a lot in the state of Iowa. So with Joni Ernst, she has somewhat of a large base in the state of Iowa because she takes a lot of the more rural voters. However, I mean, you also have a very strong Democratic candidate. So, Theresa Greenfield, she's running against Joni Ernst. So, at this point, it's going to be pretty hard to tell who's going to take the edge over who. However, I mean, since Joni Ernst has a big, advancement with rural voters, and she knows, how to appeal to them, that is a majority part of the electorate. So, while Theresa Greenfield might carry those, a little bit of those, Joni Ernst might have... It might not be too difficult for her to carry the state of Iowa at this point. I think Joni Ernst might win by around less than 1%. The race is going to be tight. So in Montana, less than 1%. So these Senate races are fastly changing. Example, Montana and Iowa. So, I mean, at the end of the day, this map looks very good for the Democrats. They are currently expected to win 51 seats compared to the Republicans' 49. Again, Democrats will need a majority if Joe Biden wins to get anything done at this point. And I mean, right now, this map is constantly changing. So we've seen some seats move further to the left, some further to the right. So, I mean, things are constantly changing, like I said. So I hope you guys enjoyed the video. If so, please give it a huge thumbs up, like and subscribe, and turn on post notifications to get notified when I post my next video. And guys, please remember that I will be going live for the August 14th or August 11th primaries. We're going to see live results, and we're going to do other things on the live stream, and that's going to be very interesting. So stay tuned for that, and I hope you enjoyed the video, and goodbye.